Have you ever imagined what it would be like inside a giant weather kitchen? I mean, a place where these huge, invisible ingredients are mixing together to cook up the wildest storms on the entire planet? Well, believe it or not, that's kind of what the United States is. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find out the secret recipe for the most powerful storm of them all, the tornado. So let's get cooking.
Okay, first things first, get a load of this number, 75%. That means if you could somehow round up every single tornado that happens on Earth in a year, 3 out of every 4 of them would be happening right here in the US. That pretty much makes America the undisputed tornado champion of the world.
So that leads to the really big question, right? Why here? What is it about the US that makes it such a magnet for twisters? Well, it's definitely not just bad luck. There is a very, very specific recipe at play, one that Mother Nature cooked up herself. So let's put on our detective hats, and we're going to break down that recipe ingredient by ingredient.
All right, so every amazing recipe needs its key ingredients. But for a tornado, we're not talking about flour and sugar. Nope. We are talking about 3 gigantic features of our planet that have to come together in just the right way to create a storm.
So let's check out our recipe card. Our 3 main ingredients are a giant mountain wall, a super-powered bathtub, and a freezing cold blast of Arctic air. I know, it sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? But stick with me, because we're about to see exactly how each one of these plays a super important part.
Let's dive in with our first ingredient. You've probably heard of them, the incredible Rocky Mountains. But they aren't just pretty to look at. They're like a giant wall that messes with the weather in a very, very specific way.
You see, most of the weather in North America moves from the west to the east, and it usually brings all this moist air from the Pacific Ocean along with it. But when that air bumps into the Rockies, this huge wall running from north to south, it can't go through them. It has to go over them. And that is where things start to get really interesting.
So this whole process has a name. It's called the rain shadow effect. Here's how to think about it. Imagine the air coming from the ocean is like a big, wet sponge. As it gets pushed up the western side of the mountains literally squeeze that sponge. All that moisture falls out as rain and snow. So by the time that air makes it over to the other side, the east side, where the Great Plains are, it's been squeezed completely dry. So the big takeaway here is that our first ingredient, the mountains, gives us a steady supply of very, very dry air.
Okay, so we've got our dry air, check. Now let's move on to our second ingredient, and you'll see how this all starts to build. We need some moisture to get this storm recipe going, and we get a ton of it from the Gulf of Mexico. This isn't just any water, it's the perfect fuel for a storm.
Yeah, the best way to picture the Gulf of Mexico is like a giant, warm bathtub that never, ever gets cold. It's constantly sending up all this warm, steamy tropical air, and it pushes it north, right into the middle of the country. This warm, wet air is the total opposite of that dry air coming over the mountains. Okay, so we've got dry air and we've got warm, moist air. What's the final piece of the puzzle here? Well, we need something to really get the party started. And that something is a huge blast of super cold, dry air from all the way up in the Arctic.
This Arctic air is like a chilly giant waking up in the north. It's incredibly cold and heavy or dense. Now, in other parts of the world, like Europe or Asia, they have these big mountain ranges that run east to west, and they act like a fence, blocking this kind of cold air from moving south. But in North America, there's nothing in the way. It's like a super highway for cold air to come rushing down from Canada.
Okay, all our ingredients are in the bowl. We've got dry air from the west, warm, moist air from the south, and that cold air from the north. Now it's time for the action. It's time to mix them all together in this giant mixing bowl we call the Great Plains, right in the middle of America.
And this map shows that collision perfectly. You've got this cold, heavy air from the north acting like a big bully, just crashing into that warm, light, steamy air coming up from the south. And remember, the dry air from the Rockies is already there. They are all on a collision course, right in the heart of the country.
So what do you think happens when heavy, cold air smashes into light, warm air? Well, that cold air acts like a ramp or a wedge, and it forces all that warm, moist air to shoot straight up and super fast. This creates these massive, towering clouds and the kind of powerful thunderstorms we call supercells. And these are the monster storms that can create tornadoes. This perfect storm setup is exactly why the US gets hit so hard. I mean, as this quote says, you can really just blame geography. This completely unique combination of mountains, the Gulf, and wide-open plains creates a perfect battleground for weather that you just don't see anywhere else on Earth.
So you're probably thinking, okay, mystery solved. But here's the twist. Scientists looked around the world and found another place that has almost the exact same recipe, but it doesn't have nearly as many tornadoes. This means we are still missing one tiny but super important secret ingredient.
Let's take a look at South America. They have the gigantic Andes Mountains, which, create dry air. And they have the huge, steamy Amazon rainforest, which provides tons of moist air. So they have the mountain wall and the superpowered bathtub. Why aren't they the world's other big tornado hotspot?
You know, scientists were puzzled by this for a long time, until they started looking not just at the air itself, but at what the air was flowing over. See, in North America, our warm, moist air flows over the really smooth waters of the Gulf of Mexico. But in South America, that warm air has to travel over the rough, bumpy, dense top of the Amazon rainforest with all its hills and tall trees.
And that right there is it. The secret ingredient is smoothness. I know, it sounds a little weird, but the texture of the ground hundreds of miles away from the storm actually makes all the difference. Let me show you why.
You see, to get a tornado, the air in a thunderstorm doesn't just need to go up. It needs to spin. And that spin comes from something called wind shear. Basically, that's just when winds at different heights are blowing at different speeds or in different directions. That difference in speed is what can cause a chunk of air to start rolling horizontally, kind of like a log on the ground.
Look at how this works. The smooth surface of the Gulf of Mexico, it's like a super slick bowling lane. It doesn't really slow down the wind near the surface, so you get fast winds near the ground and even faster winds a little bit higher up. That difference creates a ton of wind shear, which gets the air rolling. But the Amazon rainforest, that's like trying to roll a ball over a thick, shaggy carpet. It creates a lot of friction and slows the wind way down near the ground. And that means a lot less wind shear and way less spin.
And just like researcher Funing Lee puts it, that wind shear is the absolute key. It's what determines if the air even has the potential to spin and form a tornado in the first place. So our secret ingredient, the smoothness of the Gulf, is what gives American thunderstorms their special ability to spin up a storm.
So, now we finally know the full recipe, but the story doesn't end there. Because just like any recipe, you can change the ingredients, even just a little bit. And as our planet changes, the places where tornadoes tend to happen are starting to change too.
For a really long time, when people talked about tornadoes, they always thought of Tornado Alley, places like Kansas and Oklahoma. But lately, scientists have noticed more and more dangerous tornadoes happening in a new area that they're calling Dixie Alley, which is over in the southeastern United States.
Now, tornadoes in Dixie Alley can be especially dangerous for a few reasons. For one, they often happen at night, when people are asleep. They can also be wrapped up in heavy rain, which makes them almost impossible to see. And they happen in areas with more hills and trees, which also makes them harder to spot and gives people less warning. So this means it's more important than ever to pay attention to those weather warnings, no matter where you live.
And this all brings us to our final big question. We've learned that tornadoes are all about a very specific geographic recipe. But as our planet gets warmer, especially the oceans, that's like turning up the heat on our superpowered bathtub ingredient. It's changing our entire weather recipe in real time. And that really makes you wonder, with these new ingredients in the mix, where on Earth will the next tornado hotspot be cooked up?